in the last session, we had written our first macro. So just a quick recap of what we did. First thing, whenever you save a macro, remember it cannot be a normal Excel file. It has to be file, save as, and it has to be a macro enabled workbook. That is Excel SN. If you save a file as an Excel SX, then the macro will not be saved. That's step number one. Is a macro workbook different from a normal Excel file? Not at all. Everything that can happen in a normal Excel file will happen in a macro enabled workbook as well. But in this, you can also run macros. For this, we need the developer tab. And how do you get this? We go to file, then we go to options, and then in customize ribbon, we make sure to enable the developer tab. Why is it called the developer tab? Because only developers will use macros. A normal Excel user will never be working with macros. Then I showed you that if you want to write a code, you can click on Visual Basic in the top left corner. And we inserted a module. And remember, we got this code from the internet called Table of Content, which was very simple. All we had to do was we went online, we typed VBA code 2. And after writing VBA code 2, you can write whatever you want. For example, if you want to say unhide all sheets, it will give you unhide all sheets. If you want to say protect sheet with password, it will give you protect sheet with password. That is how easy it is to search for ready-made codes available on the internet, right? And there are thousands, not even hundreds, there are thousands of such codes available. Today, what I want to do is I want to show you how a form is created. You know, like the form that I showed you in the Sterlite example, I want to give you a complete illustration like that. So let me just quickly remove all of the sheets, right? And we'll create a simple form. First, we'll go to VBA. Okay, we have a sheet, we have a workbook, we have a module, okay? But we need a fourth entity, which is called a user form. How do you do that? You simply click on the workbook name. So this is my workbook, my first macro. Right click, insert, and then insert a user form like this. Once you've done that, in the user form, I will be able to put anything I want. So I have a toolbox here. So we have labels, we have text boxes, we have command button, radio button, everything is there. So I'll just put a text box like this, and I'll put a label like this. Right? So I'll say this is my name, and we don't need such a large form. So let's just make it a little smaller. If you want to change the color, you have a properties window on the left, and I can just change the color to, let's say blue, and I'll change the font color to white. Perfect. And then inside this box, I want to put a name, and I will now put a submit button, which is my command button. So I'll write submit here. Now what should happen? The user should write a value in this text box, and that value, when I click on the submit button, which should go in the cell A1, this one, right? So how do I do this? I will double click on my submit button, double click, and I'll say that when the user clicks on the command button 1, then range A1 dot value is equal to text box 1 dot value, which means whatever value is there in text box 1 will go in range A1. Let's see how it works. I will run the form, so I can just click on this run button here, F5. It will show me the form. Let me write Havish, and if I press submit, the value will come in A1. That's how simple it is, right? But what might happen is that you also want that when a person is opening the form, any value which is already there in A1 should be shown in the text box, which means now I'll modify it. I'll say my user form initialize. This means When the user form is being initialized, that means it is being opened for the first time, then I want the opposite to happen, which means the text box one value is equal to whatever value is there in A1. So just think about what will happen. When the user opens the form, if any value is written in text box one, the value will come in, any value is written in A1, it will come in text box one. And if the user wants to change, they can do that also. So this time you notice, I'm going to write a name here. And when I run the form, you will notice that when I open the form, that name which was written in A1 will automatically come in this box. And if I want to change it, I can change it and I can modify it like this. Right? Any questions so far?
Sir, like
Yep.
if the user like submits a number instead of name, so how do you like do that? Like,
If the user submits a number,
number, we don't want number, we want name. So is there any provision for that?
if you don't want the number, okay, so you should be able to say that. Let's see. So if, let me check, just a moment. Okay, so I can say if the value which is in text box one, okay, is numeric. So what I should be able to say here is, let me just see the syntax once. So if is numeric is equal to true, then message box, you cannot enter a number. Else and end if, right? Yeah, I think this looks okay. Let's check once. So what will happen now is I will open the form, and if I try to enter 100 and submit, it will say you cannot enter a number like this, right? So a very good question. This is how you do validation, right? See guys, whether you're working on Python, whether you're working on Java, whether you're working on the cloud, validation will always be required. You will always like, you know, in Google Forms, you can do this by clicking on a button, but when you're actually creating something using a language, you will have to write the code. Whether you're doing it on Excel or on any other language, it doesn't matter. Even if you're doing it in Java, these conditions will still have to be written like this, right? Okay, there's a question. Let me see that. Okay, if you have to fill 2000 cells, then will we be writing the code every time? So a very good question. So everybody, let's take an example. Let me show you both my screens so you can see, understand this properly. Now see, sometimes what will happen is you want to write a number from, let's say, 1 to 100, right? But you obviously don't want to write it 100 times. So how will you do it? Let me create a new user form. So insert user form. And what will I say? I will write just a simple text box and a command button, right? We only need this. So the user will basically put his number inside the text box, and whatever number he has put in, till that number, that sequence should come. So we are going to use a simple loop here. We will say for I is equal to 1 to text box 1 dot value. What do we want to write? We want to say cells. Now in cells, it is asking us for the row and the column number. Now we know that all the values will come in the first column. Basically, I want, look at this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I want numbers like this, correct? So this means that every time my column is 1, but my row keeps on changing from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. So in cells, I will write that the row number should be I, but the column number should be 1. So dot value is equal to I. And then I'll say next I, right, like this. Basically, 3 lines is all that you require to do here. Let's see how it works now. So let me remove all of this. I will run my form. it says what is a number. So if I say 15 and I press submit, in one click, it will give me numbers from 1 to 15 like this. All of you who have worked on these simple programming fundamentals earlier would know what it is. It's a simple loop that we are writing. Any of you who have not worked on programming earlier, I'm sure when you look at it, you will agree with me that it's not very difficult, right? Of course, it's a little boring because you have to write the program, but I mean, I hope it makes sense to you.
So I have a question. What is the default data type of these cells which are getting filled? Like first you enter a name, now we're entering some numbers. So in Excel,
Yeah.
is it general or?
Yeah, so Excel is a very funny application that way. What Excel does is it automatically detects the data type. If you're giving
Okay,
it a
okay,
number, it will show as a general, but this is actually a number. If you give it
okay,
a
okay,
text, it will automatically it is an auto detection.
okay, okay. So even if I enter a date, it will show general, but
Yeah, yeah,
it will
I
be
know
the
what
date.
you mean. So
Yeah,
basically,
yeah.
see, in in a lot of languages, you will have hard typed data types, right? You have to declare the data types. In
Mm.
Excel, if you want to declare it, you can. Like I can say dim I as integer. If I wanted to do this, I can do this also,
Okay, okay.
right? If I say as a text, right, and then I run my code, this time what will happen is, sorry, what happened? Why am I not able to declare it as a text? Just a minute.
You have given it as text and initialized to 1. So that may be an issue.
Yeah, so this will not work as a counter. So what we can do here is, if you want it to be converted to a text, let me show you that also, right? This is a good example. See, if you have written some values in A1 to A15, and obviously this has to be a number, otherwise the loop will not run. But after running the code, you want this to get converted to a text value, right? So how do we do this? Please watch it. Now we can do something called record macro, this one. Everybody, let's see how it works. I will select the column. I'll click on record macro and OK. I will select all of this and I will convert it into a text value. So if I go to general and I make it a text, you notice it becomes a text value. I'll now stop my recording. What has happened now? If I go to my code, you will notice that it is now telling me that this is the format that I need to write. Selection.number format is equal to @the rate. So I can just copy this, put it back in this, and let's do it once again. So I'll first delete everything. And this time when I run my code, you will notice that when I say 15 and I press submit, two things will happen. Step number one, all the numbers will come in A1 to A15 and it will also get converted to a text format. The only problem is it is only converting the first number into a text format. So we can modify that. We can say range A1 colon A, and then what is the number that we want? 15, right? So I will now say and textbox1 dot value dot select. So first I'll select A1 to A15, and once I've selected A1 to A15, then I'll convert it into a text value. Let's see this now. So 15, submit, and it gets converted to a text value. This is what I'm showing you right now is exactly how I have built every project, like the one that I showed you for Sterlite. This is exactly the process. We start with one particular code and then we keep on refactoring it, making it better, making it efficient, writing more bits of codes in it. It's just like any other development work. VBA writing is no different from any other programming language. It also has an object library. So you can see a list of all the different objects available in VBA. It's a very large list. There are thousands of things available here. Right? And VBA also works in object-oriented programming. So you have methods, which means that you have a parent and you have methods. Right? For example, if I want to make everything bold, I will have to write selection.font.size bold is equal to true, right? And obviously when I run this code now, so if I say 15 and I click on submit, it will also make it bold like this. Great. Any questions, anyone? I'll just share a very nice website with you where you can find a lot of codes to practice with. Top 100, not website codes, VBA codes. See, VBA programming will seem difficult. That way, now after doing Power Query, when I come to Python and all, you will find that also difficult for those of you who are working on it for the first time. But that's okay. You know, that's a natural part of learning. So don't feel turned off or don't feel scared that, oh, will I ever be able to do it? You will 100% be able to do it, but you will have to do it gradually. You know, you can't expect to learn it in a day. It's not that sort of a thing. Right? So if you notice here, there are 100 codes that have been given on this website. So you can just copy and paste them. And this is a great way of learning how it works. Right? Like, do you see this? Toggle formula bar display. I'll copy this, Control C. We will come back and we'll paste it in a module. It's called toggle formula bar display. Let me come to my Excel. I'll go to view. Sorry, I'll go to insert and I'll insert a shape. And this shape will become a action. So when somebody will click on this shape, this macro will run. Toggle formula bar display. So what will happen now when I click? Do you see what is happening? The formula bar is showing and disappearing like this. Now, some of you may say, but why do we need to do it? I can also click on view and select the formula bar. Same thing, right? But now I'm showing you how you can do these things using VBA code. Also remember, VBA will allow you to do certain things that you can't do on Excel otherwise. For example, look at this. Let me show you, just give me a moment. Okay, let's say you have some text like this. How should I show you the example? Just give me a moment. Okay, we can just write it like this. So everyone, this is my question. I want you to remove all the non-alpha. That means all the non-alpha numeric characters, which means I just want to see the number and the text values. I don't want to see this. I don't want to see this exclamation mark, $sign, at the rate, all of this. How will you do it? Now, a lot of you will say, Havish, we can go to find and replace it one by one. But will that not take a lot of time? Because you have to understand every pattern. So what have I done here? I've created a simple macro called remove non-alpha, right? This one. I click on this button, select the range, and you notice in one click, it removes all the non-alpha. It only shows me the number and the text. What is the code? If I show you the code here for remove non-alpha, formulas, just a moment, formatting, not in formulas. Do you see this, everyone? This is the code that I've written, which allows me to remove all the non-alpha numeric characters. Like I said, the journey of learning programming, whether it is VBA, whether it is Python or R, it all begins with a single step. If you are too scared, don't be scared, just start. Don't worry, how will I learn all of this? It will take me forever. Will I ever be able to do it? Today, you have to take out some time, whatever it is, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 2 hours, whatever amount of time you have with you. You have to take out your time and you have to practice because only you can do it. Believe me, there can be no instructor, there can be no course that can teach you VBA. Unless you get your hands dirty with programming, you will never learn. Like I said, if you just want to copy codes from the internet, there are hundreds of codes available. There are thousands of codes available. But what is the point? how will you know how to use it? How will you know how to modify it, right? How will you even know what all is possible using VBA? That will only happen when you put in the hard work from your side, right? That's how I started my journey, and that is how I encourage you to start your journey as well. Great. I want to jump over to Power Query now. So any questions on VBA, anyone? Right, so VBA is primarily used in finance because in finance is where you have a lot of automation work that is required. But HR also uses VBA quite a lot because HR also has a lot of repetitive work. The same employees, the same data, performance, training, organization development, things like that. Marketing and sales, interestingly, do not use VBA a lot, because marketing and sales already have the data with them. Their challenge is not to get the data, their challenge is to analyze the data. For marketing and sales, all of you guys who are working in marketing and sales, you guys have to focus more on Power BI and Tableau. VBA should be focused on by students who are interested in pursuing careers in supply chain, procurement, operations, finance especially. Right? Any questions? All right. If you think of something, just let me know. We have tomorrow as well. For now, I want to come to a different problem and I want to show you. Just give me a moment. Okay. So if all of you can see, I have a folder on my desktop called Superstore, which has a folder called sales. And what do we have in this? 2013, 14, 15, and 16. I'm just taking 16 and putting it outside because I want to show you something. 13, 14, 15. What is the data in these three files? It's a sales transactional data. Let me just open one of it for you. There's nothing complicated about this. We have 12 columns, and then we have about 2000 rows. And the data is very clean. It is data for 2013. Similarly, I have data for 2014 as well. Then we have 15, and then we have 16, right? Now, if I ask you that combine the data from 13, 14, and 15 into one single file, how would you do that? Of course, you will have to copy and paste. Excel doesn't have any option. There is no formula that will help you to combine these files. This is where Power BI can help us. So going back to Power BI. What we want to do here is, I'll just copy the path of this folder. We will come to Power BI. And, okay. And we click on Get Data. Now, which type of file do we want to connect to? We don't want to connect to a single file. We want to connect to an entire folder, which means I will select More, and I will connect this to an entire folder like this. It will ask me for the folder path, so I can just paste my path here and click on OK. Now, it doesn't matter whether that folder had Excel files, CSV file, JSON files, XML files, whatever type of file is there, it will combine all of them for me. So right now it is showing me 13, 14, and 15, and I click on Combine and Transform, the very first option. But now it is going to ask me which sheet do I want. Now the sheet that I want is called sheet number 1, which is the only sheet that I have. And we click on OK. And you know what will happen now? If you notice, I did not do any manual work. There was no manual copy and paste required. All I did was I selected a folder, and now a new window will open up called Power Query Editor, this one. And if you look at the first column, everybody, it's called source.name. And in this, 13, 14, and 15 have been combined together automatically. Amazing, right? With no manual effort, you have managed to combine all the multiple files into a single master file. Any questions so far? Can you imagine 3-4 years back, developers like me used to write these VBA codes. We used to spend 2 to 3 hours writing these codes for our clients. And now you have a tool like this beautifully available, so simple. You just have to click on a few buttons and it appends all the data for you. Right? So if I click on close and apply, then obviously the data will come back to Power BI, but here's the best part. This is how you can automate your work. When I make a card and I put my sales in it, in fact, let's put our bar chart with region and sales in it. You will notice that it shows you it shows you 4.7 lakhs, 4.6 lakhs, so on and so forth, right? But if I go back to my folder and I select that new data, which is 2016, and I put it in the same folder, look how amazing this is. I can just click on refresh, okay? And in one click, do you see the data changes? Which means that you can have any number of files in that folder. You can keep on adding or removing files from that folder and everything will automatically work without any manual intervention. After combining the trees, can it be exported back to an Excel SX file? Very good question, Saurav. If you want to export it back as an Excel SX file, unfortunately, there is no export button available on Power BI, but you can click on the data view. And this is the table which has all the 4 years in it. You can simply click on copy table and you can paste it on Excel. That will work. Okay? And in any case, please remember that you don't need to use Power BI for this entire process. So if I can show this to you, even on Excel, you have data, and in data you have get data, and in get data you have from file and you have from folder. So the same thing that I showed you on Power BI now works on Excel as well, because Excel also has Power Query Editor on it, right? But you will only have it if you're working on Excel 2016 and above. If you're working on an older version of Excel, 7, 10, or 13, this might not work. Right? Can we sort the data year-wise? I've actually closed the file, but that's okay. I'll do it once again here. So let me click on get data from file. All of you can see this, how we do the same thing on Excel as well. From folder. No, Piyush, see, doing it on VBA will be much tougher because you will have to write the code. Then certain clients might have some restrictions where you can't use VBA. So that is a challenge. Plus you also have to understand the layout of the data. The benefit of using Power Query for this is that it takes care of all the coding in the background and the user doesn't have to bother with anything. Right? Like I said, of course, VBA can be used for this. I used to write VBA codes for, let me show you. VBA code to combine multiple workbooks. Do you see this, everyone? How to combine multiple Excel files into one Excel workbook. And there are VBA codes like this available. Right? But this will have to be modified. Like you'll have to change your environment. You will have to change the path. Then you'll have to change the extension. If the extensions are different, then you will have to use an operator here. You will have to assume that the sheet names are the same in every workbook. So it is possible, but do remember that there are a lot of prerequisites that you will have to keep in mind. And it's definitely much more difficult. And also remember, the problem with VBA is that VBA is not very efficient. So if you're trying to combine 200 files, VBA will crash because VBA can't handle such large data sets. But Power Query does not have that problem. Power Query can handle data sets with 50 million records, 100 million records as well. Right? Okay, so I'll just do it once again. We'll click on Superstore and then select Sales. Okay and okay. It shows me 4 files, 13, 14, 15, 16. Combine and transform. Select the sheet, click on OK, and it will open Power Query Editor. Please remember, the Power Query Editor on Excel is exactly the same that you have on Power BI as well. There is not even 1% difference. A lot of people feel that, oh, Excel would have limited options and some things will only be available on Power BI. That is not true at all. Everything available on Power BI is available on Excel. In fact, interestingly, Power Query was not introduced on Power BI. Power Query first came on Excel and then it came to Power BI, right? Okay, so somebody was saying, how can we sort the data? See, the data is already sorted. It's already sorted in an ascending order. If you want to sort it in a descending order, you can do that as well, like this. Whatever operation you want to perform. In any case, when I click on close, then all the data will come back to my Excel. So if you notice, we have all the 4 years here. We have 10,000 records from 2013 to 2016, like this. Right? I'll just wait for 1 minute in case anybody has any questions.
With this combined data in Power BI work for different data types like Excel file and some CSV file or something like that?
Yeah, so, okay, sure. Good question. See, everyone, what might happen is that you might have 3 files which are Excel and 3 files that are CSV. It is always recommended not to have different data types in the same folder. If you do, then you should always do the loading separately and then append it manually. It is never considered a good practice to have different files of different types. In fact, that will never happen. For example, if I'm downloading some data from SAP, and if it is coming as a CSV format, it will come as a CSV format every time. If it is coming as a JSON format, it will come as a JSON format every time. It will never happen that one time it is JSON and the other time it is Excel. You know, because the layout, not the layout, but the architecture would be different. One might be a flat file, one might be a tabular file. So it is never recommended to have files of different types.
One doubt.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? In one file, there are
Lost your voice. Say that again. One file is 5 columns and the other file is 6 columns. Will it be combined? Of course it will, but there are lots of factors that you have to keep in mind. If the column names are matching, then it will combine. If the column spellings are different, like in one it is called customer ID and in the next one it is called CUST ID, then it will not combine. Right? But if the number of columns are different, that's okay. It doesn't matter. Like there can be a null value or a missing column. that will not cause a problem. See guys, I have an entire course on Power Query, and that is exactly what I covered. Do you see all this? How do you combine from multiple workbooks? How do you combine when the sheet names are not matching? How do you combine when the columns are mismatching? How do you combine multiple workbooks and multiple sheets? So basically, all of these problems can be tackled. Power Query is a very, very powerful tool. It can handle all of these issues, but you have to remember you will have to understand how to do it. It is not like Excel, right? It will follow a different process altogether. But it's an ETL tool. At the end of the day, you have to understand that what Power Query uses everybody is a language called M code. Do you see this on the right side? All these steps. What is my source? Folder.files. This is my path. Then I'm removing all the hidden files. Then I'm taking all the content from the file. I'm renaming the column. I'm removing the extra columns. I'm expanding the data. I'm changing the type of columns, and I'm sorting the rows. This one we can remove. So basically this entire code that you see here, this is called M code, right? It's a different language. It is not used by any other platform. Only Excel and Power BI use this. You know, that is why I find it very irritating when people tell me that we want to become a data analyst, but we don't want to learn programming. Even if you're working on Excel, you can never become an advanced Excel user unless and until you learn program. Even though this is not programming, it's a very different query language, but you have to learn all this. Otherwise, how will you say that you know Excel very well? All of these things are a part of Excel. These are not add-ons, okay? Or everything I'm showing you is an inbuilt part of Excel. Never go and tell somebody your skills with Excel are good when you have never worked on all these things earlier. Okay? All right, let's do one final example and then we'll come to Python in R. I also want to show you how you can get data from the internet. So I can just go to from web and I can type moneycontrol.com. Okay. I can even copy the link. I've just typed it here, moneycontrol.com. I'll click on OK. And you would see here that I can connect to the website. It says there is an error. Let's quickly see. Right. So as you notice, I'm connecting to the website directly from Excel. I can select the first table, which is my index value and the high and the close and the change, right? I can click on transform data because, you know, the headings and all are not correct. So I just click on transform data. We'll go to Power Query and we can basically say this is my close value. This is my change value. This is my index. And this is actually my percentage change, correct? So I'll convert this into a percentage, but then we'll also have to divide this by 100. So we'll just click on transform statistics, standard, divide, and we divide it by 100. Right? So we can see the change that has happened. Friday, you know, was a very insignificant change that happened in the market. And we can call this my percentage change. All done. Now, if we want, we can also sort the data in descending. So let me put my closing value, or let me put the change percentage in descending. So these 5 show the maximum change. And if I want to remove the others, I can simply click on remove rows and remove the bottom rows, or opposite, I can say keep the top 5 rows. So I just say I want to keep the top 5 rows and we click on close and load, and you notice it is now automatically going to show you that as of Friday, this was the market results. Sorry, these were the market results like this. And you know the best part, like 2 days from now, Monday will come, the market will reopen. You don't have to repeat the process. You can simply right click and refresh, and it will automatically refresh the data from the website. Very cool, right? again, you know, these are things that were not available 3-4 years back, but now Excel is such a powerful tool. It has the capability of being able to connect to different websites and databases as well. As you can see, we can connect even to different databases here. Like I can directly connect to SAP HANA from Excel. How cool is that? Like who would have thought that something like this would ever be possible? Right? So you have Microsoft Azure, you have different online services, you even have Salesforce available here. And they keep on adding more and more options to this list. Right? Just give me a moment. There's an update coming. Anyway, right. Any questions, anyone? Okay.
Is there any function which extract the data from web and then keep on adding in an Excel file, maybe something of that
Not
sort?
really. Not really. See,
not just change the values of predefined cell, but adding new rows every day or whenever the data changes from the web.
yeah, I mean, if you have connected Excel to your SQL server, then when your organization database will have, like, let's say you have 100 records today, right? Let's say you've conducted 100 surveys, right? So you connect it to your SQL server, it will show you 100. As in how more records will keep on getting added, your Excel will also keep on getting updated.
Okay, I was just asking if, like, we can suppose there is some data on web that we want to take it here in the Excel.
No, what do you mean the web? They can be, see, web is not one thing, no? A database is also on the web, a website is also on the web. So when you say on the web, what exactly are you referring to?
Website, a simple, let's take Nifty closing application. So every day we want to record on day-wise basis what is the closing date. So we want every day to get a new row updated, added to the Excel sheet.
Available. Watch this. I'll show you. Hold on. Give me a company. Give me the name of a listed company.
I'll take Reliance.
No, which Reliance? Reliance is, there are so many Reliances, no? So I just connect it to a stock data type. Everyone, data and stocks, okay? So the first thing I'm doing is I'm converting Reliance into a stock data type. Obviously, there'll be a few options that come here. So let me say I'm selecting, let me just load first. Okay, so let's say Reliance Industries on National Stock Exchange, okay? Now I have this. Let me put my start, which is the 1st of September 2020, and my end, which is equal to today. So obviously this will be dynamic, everyone. So today is the 12th, tomorrow it will become the 13th, and so on and so forth, right? So what we want to do now is we have these, we can simply now write equal to stock, 1 second. Actually, my update is happening, so I will not be able to show you this function till I'm able to do that. Wait, just give me a moment. Actually, my update is happening, so the function is locked for now, but nevertheless, I'll just show it to you on a video because the answer to your question is already there, right? Just one moment. So let's see. Pivot table, calculations, get data from the internet, financial and stock data. Let's quickly see this. Anyway, मैं आपको ऐसे दिखा देता हूँ for now. So I can at least write equal to and then select the company name, and then say I want to see the high value, right? So it is showing me that this is the value as of Friday market closing. And this is a function, so this will automatically get updated. What I wanted to show you was something called stock history. Even though I can't, it's not there with me right now, it's a function that will come. So Excel has launched something called stock history. It just came a few months back. And basically here you can put the start date and the end date, and it will automatically create a dynamic stock history for you like this. Very clear, right? Stock history, what is the starting date, what is the end date, and it will automatically create a stock history for you. Hope that answers the question. But do remember, Excel is not a web scraping tool. You know, so when you work on Python and you want to scrape data from the internet, let's say Amazon or something, Excel can't really do all that. I mean, it can sort of, but Excel is very bad at it because Visual Basic is a very old language. It's a dead language, right? So of course, Python and R will still be required for those things. All right, any other question, anyone? Yeah, I think most of my functions have gone away. All right, so the next 5 minutes is going to be a little boring for those of you who already know how to work on Python and R. But just to make sure that all of us are on the same page, I just want to give you guys a roadmap. How should you learn it? Can you just give me a sense of how would you rate yourself on a scale of 0 to 5, where 0 is no idea, no knowledge, and let's say 10 is expert on Python? Everyone, can you just put it in the chat window just so that I understand what your background is? Okay, so I can see mostly zeros. Okay, so Piyush is a 1, then 2, and then 1. Okay. All right. All right. So I would say there are about 20% people at a, you know, like a 2 to 4, and then another 40% maybe are at a 0, right? Maybe a little more than that. Okay. So like I said, those of you who already know how to do all this, for you, the next 5 minutes might be a little basic and boring, but maybe you will still have a refresher. So if you don't want to pay a lot of attention, that's okay. But just keep an eye. Maybe you will learn something new. The best way to work on Python, the simplest way, maybe not the best way, but the simplest way is to work on something called Google Colab, right? Which is the Google Colaboratory. So what it does is Google Colab is basically a notebook on the cloud that allows you to run your codes directly like this, right? So you just need to have a Gmail account. And once you have a Gmail account, you can just, let's say, create a new notebook. I'll do it right in front of you, everybody. So I'm creating a new notebook. And the best part here is that you don't have to install anything. You don't even have to install Python. All your processing is being handled by Google. So even if you're working on a very slow computer, it doesn't matter, right? When you're doing machine learning and AI, your system has to be very, very fast. Otherwise, it takes a lot of time to run. The beauty is that you can use Google to run all of this. For example, if I say 1 plus 1, right? And I run it. Do remember the first time you run it, it takes some time. And once it connects and starts to run, then it becomes very fast. But the first time it does take some time. Okay, so you see there is a result here. Now, if I say print and I say hello and I run it, it says hello. What is happening? Now, try to understand, everyone. What we are doing here is we are actually using Python. So this IPYNB that you see here is what is we call as a interactive Python notebook. So the I is for interactive, PY is for Python, and NB is for notebook. So what we're doing here, we're essentially running Python completely on the cloud on Google. So your files can be saved on Google Drive and you can run it directly here. If you want to do it, you can. But if you want to do it properly, then you have to install two things. One is Python, obviously. So you can just go to python.org and it's very simple. Just click on downloads and install the latest installation of Python, right? 3.8.5. 3.9 is going to come in sometime. This is one thing you have to install. The second thing is you have to install something called Anaconda. So the Anaconda is basically an open source distribution that allows you to run right? So there are some paid versions as well, like they have a team edition and an enterprise edition, which is very costly, but you can use the free one as well. And this is where you get something called Jupyter. Now, some of you who have not worked on Python, I'm sure you would have at least heard of Jupyter. Jupyter is basically three words. JU stands for Julia, PY stands for Python, and TER stands for R, right? So Julia is another language, right? And then of course you have Python and you have R as well, right? So Python, Jupyter essentially allows us to run these three languages in an IDE. An IDE is an interactive development environment. So an IDE basically is just like a program or a software where you can run all these codes, right? Now, is Anaconda the only one available? Not at all. There is something called PyCharm, right? Which is again free of cost. PyCharm is a much more advanced environment where you can run your programs. Then you have something called Visual Studio, right? Visual Studio again is a programming environment where you can run all of this. And then you have also something called VS Code, which is different. Visual Studio Code is again a slightly simpler code editor that allows you to run different types of language, not just Python, but other types of languages as well. Does it seem scary for those of you who have never worked on it earlier? Yes, it does. This is meant for proper programmers, right? As a MBA grad, as somebody who will work with programming not so extensively, do not go to Visual Studio and PyCharm because you will find it very difficult. This is meant for IT professionals. This is not meant for people like you and me. Can you also use IntelliJ IDE? I haven't heard of that. Yeah, it's the same thing. JetBrains has PyCharm as well. But this is for what? This is for Java, is it? Okay. Yeah, it's the same thing. PyCharm, I think, is for Python and this is for Java. I'm not sure if it has Python or not. I haven't worked on it. Okay, give me 10 seconds. I think my updates were installed. So if you give me a moment, let me just see if my Excel is working or not. No, it's still not working. It's very irritating, but just give me a moment. Yeah, so some of these things are not working. That's okay. This is only for your understanding so that you don't feel that Anaconda is the only way possible. You can do it on other packages as well, even though this is the one that is recommended for beginners, right? Okay, now let's see how it looks. So I'm going to open my Anaconda Navigator. When you open it, it looks like this, right? Why am I not signed in? Just give me a moment. Anyway, doesn't matter. We can sign in later. So if you notice here, we have Jupyter, and then you also have different types of extensions available, right? You don't need to bother with all of these things. I'm just going to focus on Jupyter here. So Jupyter it runs on the cloud. It's an interactive computing environment. So basically, it will run on your browser. So when I click on launch, you will notice that it is actually going to open it on my browser like this. whichever browser you're using, whether you're working on Chrome or Internet Explorer or Bing or Edge. And this is my root folder where I'm working. And then in this folder, you will see these are the different notebooks that I have, right? So I have a course on beginners, Open Excel, there's something on natural language processing, so on and so forth. Let's take a simple example. So what we want to do here is, let me show you. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Actually, why are we doing it like this? Let me show it to you from scratch. So I'll click on new and I'll create a new Python workbook. Now, when you're working on Python, this is the interface. And basically, when we have to work on a library, you can see, if I want to write something like print hello, I can do that, right? Because the print command is available as a part of Python internally, right? But I'm sure all of you might want to create some visualization, let's say using Seaborn. But when you want to use Seaborn to create these charts, the problem is that Seaborn has to be first installed on your computer. And how do you do that? You will click on Anaconda prompt, right? And in this, you will first have to install the package. So in Python, it is called a library. In R, it is called a package. I'll show you R as well. So I'll just say pip install. Pip is basically a package installer, and I'll install Seaborn. Now, as you can see, it says that it is already satisfied. So it is already installed on my computer. Once I've installed it, after that, I can start writing my code. So now I'll say, take a simple example. I'll say that tips is equal to sns dot, sorry, let me first import the relevant library. So I'll say import matplot lib.py plot as plt. I'm importing numpy as np, and I'm importing pandas as pd. And I'm also importing Seaborn as SNS. Now, what are these terms? PD, SNS, NP, they're nothing. You could write anything you want. Basically, these are just nicknames that you're giving, right? So usually what as a developer we do is we call it as PLT, NP, and PD. But we can write whatever we want. So we'll click on run. So what has happened is that now Seaborn has been imported in my current workbook. So this workbook, let's say IITR that I'm here working on right now, Seaborn has been imported. And now we can start working with certain visualizations. So I'll say that my tips data set, this is just a name that I'm giving, is an inbuilt data set available on Seaborn, which is a data set that I want to load. So I just call it as data set and tips. And then we also want to create a relationship plot. So let's create a rel plot where it'll say that on my x-axis, we have the total bill amount. And then on the y-axis, we have our tipping amount. Right? And what data set are we using? We are using the tips data set. Before I run this, I want to show you how the tips data set looks. So the tips is basically an inbuilt data set that is already available on Seaborn. And this is the data set, everyone. Very small data set. It has 245 rows in it, and it has 7 columns in it. What is the data? The data is for the tip that people are giving at a restaurant. So this is the bill amount, first column. This is the tipping amount. This is the gender, men or women. This is the smoking status, yes or no. This is the day. The days are only 4 days. So you have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Then you have the time, which is lunch or dinner. And then you have the size, which is the number of people who were having lunch or dinner. Now, I hope you're able to connect this to this. So I'm taking the total bill amount and the tipping amount. So I'm taking total bill and the tip amount. So when I click on run, what will happen is it will automatically create a relationship plot like this, which is a scatter plot, right? This is the basic idea of working with Python. If you want to change the color, like if I want to show smokers as one color and then non-smokers as a different color, I can now write hue is equal to smoker. And now you notice it will show you, I'm sorry, what am I writing? Um, so reduction operation minimum, which is no identity. Okay, let me just do it once again. Okay, I'm not sure why the error is coming. Why is the error coming? Anyway, let me show you something else. So this was a simple example. Now let's say you want to work with something different. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you want to create something you can't do on Excel, which is called a violin plot. Right? This is how it looks. So it helps you plot measures, which is numeric data, and it uses something called KDE, which is a kernel density estimator. The best way to learn how to do all this is to go to the official Seaborn documentation. And on the website, you will notice that they've basically given you all the tutorials. So you notice you have, this is telling you what are the different types of plots available. So we have the rel plot, scatter plot, line plot, right? These are different types of distributions. Then you have different parameters available here like this. Similarly, you can also look at examples. So you can look at the tutorial and you can see that you can see these examples that have been covered. You know, it's interesting. So one way to look at it is that it's so simple because you don't have to run around anywhere. Everything is available on the website. But you know, the challenge is that there is so much available that you will have to spend a lot of time learning all of this, right? Remember, you have to learn it. You don't have to remember it. It's not an examination that you have to remember everything and put it on an examination paper. You just have to understand how all of these things work. Now that I've shown you this one example, let me show you something different. So let me first close this workbook. Hold on. Look at this. So this is a entire notebook which is creating a natural language processing. So basically, what is the logic here? It is going to take some input and it is going to automatically give us different types of insights. Things like how many words are appearing how many times, what is the word frequency, what is the sentiment coming from the data? Is it a positive sentiment or is it a negative sentiment? This has not been made by me, this has been made by somebody else, but I just want to show you how an entire process looks like. The first thing is you are importing a library called NLTK, which is a natural language engine. From the NLTK corpus, you're importing Brown. What is this? This is what is called a corpora. So a corpora basically is a text which has already been given to you. So do you see this entire text that you see here? What is this? Where is it coming from? This is basically 1 million words or 10 lakh words of American English printed in 1961. Where do you find this? So if you go to the website, it will show you where all this data is coming from, like this, right? So this is what is called a dictionary. So you're taking the entire dictionary like this. These are all the words available. Then you do something called tokenization, which is you will take a word, you will take a sentence and break it into different words. For example, I can take an entire sentence and break it into different, like this is my entire paragraph now, and I can break it into different words like this. Do you see this? Like are, you, alone, or, lost, they have all become different words. Then we do some data cleaning. So we change it to a lowercase. Then we remove the stop words. Stop words are what is called non-content words. That means any word that is not used for analysis, like these. I, me, has, if, and, but. This is no relevance to business, right? This is just used as filler words. This is what we remove from an analysis. So then after removing it, you only look at the rest of the sentence. And basically this is the process. So once you keep on cleaning the data more, after doing all of this, then you can use your vectorization, which is your scikit-learn, which is where you're using the machine learning to basically run it through some processes and then try to see what is the sort of output that you're able to come up with. Now, How much time will it take you to look at all of this and learn it? It will take some time. The best way to do this is to go to Kaggle. And let's say you want to do sentiment analysis. You can just type basic NLTK. And you will notice there are so many people who have created these examples of basic NLTK. And remember, NLTK is not the only library. You have other types of libraries as well. Like Spacy is also one of the most popular libraries. And that's it. You can just basically open any one. And you can see here that the entire notebook can be seen like this. Right? And the best part is they have also explained how they have done everything. If you want to search for Seaborn, you can just type Seaborn, and you will see that different people have created notebooks for Seaborn. And you know, this is the best way to learn. By looking at what other people are doing, you will also learn how they did it, and you know, then try to do it on your own, like this. Right? So that's the basic process of how we do this. How I use Python for my work is a little different. See, you have to understand that my work typically happens on Power BI, right? So if I'm working on Power BI, for example, let me just open it. And let me connect to the same data set that I showed you earlier. So I'll connect to my Superstore data set. Power BI and Superstore. Okay. Like I said, my work on Python is very different, but I want to show you how these tools can be integrated with each other. So for example, when I'm working on Power BI, what I can do is, please watch, I can make a Python visual, this one, a Python visualization. And in this, I will keep my sales and my profit amount. Sales and profit, right? So this has basically become a part of my data frame, which is my Panda data frame. And what is the code that we want to write here? So we can now say, let's say import matplot lib.py plot as PLT, and then I can say data set dot plot. So which type of plot do we want? We want to create a scatter chart, right? So a scatter chart. On my x-axis, I'll keep my sales amount. And then on my y-axis, I'll keep my profit amount. And we will keep the color as blue, like this, right? And finally, we want to show the visualizations. So we will say plt.show. So when I run this, there's some problem. Wait. Okay. So as you can see, I managed to create a scatter plot using Python. Yeah, thanks, Shadman. Using Python on Power BI. Can you guys imagine how beautiful this is? Because the best part is that even though this has been created on Python, if I make, let's say, a slicer using Power BI, my Python visual and my Power BI slicer are interacting with each other, which is amazing, isn't it? And that's the beauty of using Python and R on Power BI. Now, please remember, there are lots and lots of restrictions. Everything that you can do normally on Python will not work on Power BI like this, right? There are limits on the number of rows. There are limits on the types of libraries that you can use. And you will have to go to the website and see how all of these things work. But the good part is that for simple visuals that you want to create, R and Python can be integrated, R and Python can be integrated with Power BI as well. but I just wanted to show you what is the limit. So Python Power BI row limit. Let me just quickly search for it. So I think it's 1.5 lakh. Yeah. So you have a limit of 150,000 rows. So the limitation is that when you're using Python on Power BI, you can only have a data set with 150,000 rows in it. If you have more data, then it will only look at the top 150,000. It's a problem, but I mean, that is how it is. You can't do anything about it. Similarly, when you're working on R, I can click on the 3 dots. Let's say you want to do some forecasting. So I can click on get more visuals, and I can look at a visual that is actually an R visualization. Let's say if I'm looking at forecasting, so I can look at, let's say, forecasting with ARIMA, right? So if you notice here, ARIMA is an autoregressive technique, and the best part here is that it is going to use, let me just mute everyone. So if you notice, it is going to use R packages. So what does it say? It says that when you're using this visual on Power BI, it will automatically install the R package dependencies, which are auto installed, which is Proto and Zoo, like this, right? Okay. And remember, Proto and Zoo are nothing. They're just packages available for R, right? R in Proto, like this. Okay. So I will select my visual. Forecasting. We'll add it. And hopefully, if everything works properly, I can put my order date and my sales value. It will take some time. The R visuals do take a few seconds to open up. It's taking a little bit of time. It's okay. Maybe what I will do is, let me just remove some of the rows. We don't need such a large data set. So let me just keep the, let me just keep maybe the top 1000 rows. Yeah, let's see if it works now. Yeah. So as you can see, it is basically creating your ARIMA PDQ. I don't know how much of statistics you guys know, but this is, let me just show it to you. One moment. So like you have a y equal to mx plus b equation when you're working with linear regression. Similarly, ARIMA is slightly more complicated, and ARIMA basically gives you PD and Q. So this is your autoregressive terms. You have your non-season differences, and you have your Q, which is the lagged forecast errors. I'm not going to get into detail with all of this, but just wanted to show you that, see guys, with my clients as a data analyst, I am not a statistician. Okay, my job is not to go to a client and tell them the explanation and get into in-depth analysis. My job is simply to show them this, right? Let me just a second. How do I zoom out? Okay, my job is just to show them this and to give them a consultation of what this means and why is the forecast going down or whatever it is, right? What is the seasonality factor for that matter? That's the idea. And of course, you can do some customization here, right? So you can go to forecasting settings. You can change the forecast length. So I can say I want to look at, let's say, 100 days, right? Like this. Then you have options to change the PDQ values as well. So your minimas and maximas, right? So I'm not getting into all this. The idea here is that this is not a session on statistics. This is a session on solving business problems. As a data analyst, as a management student, you're not an MSc in statistics, but every now and then, maybe out of every 20 projects, in one project, there might be a need where the client tells me, Havish, I want something more detailed. See, most of the time they are happy when I just make a line chart with my order date and my sales value. And they say, Havish, what is the forecast for, let me just remove the last step. Yeah. So they say, Havish, what is the forecast for, let's say, the next 2 years, right? So this is 13, 14, 15, 16. I can just go to analytics and I can go to forecast and I can say add a forecast for, let's say, 3 years. Like I said, 18 out of 20 times my client will be happy with this, right? 90% of the clients are happy with this forecast. They don't mind it, right? Like I can make a slicer for my region. And then whichever region I click on, I can see different forecasts for that region. Everything is working great. Now, what method is Power BI using? Power BI uses the simplest method of forecasting, which is exponential smoothing, right? Which is the most common method used across the world, across different industries. And that is the Power BI forecast tool that is used. Let me just show you the Power BI website. But whenever there is a need to do something more controlled, more advanced, something more customizable, that is where we will have to start using R and Python inside Power BI. But remember, Power BI is not a data science tool. It's a data visualization tool. So don't feel bad that why is Power BI not giving me forecasting options? Power BI's job is not to do forecasting. Power BI's job is to create dashboards for the user, right? Okay, good. So I've shown you Python. I've shown you Power BI integration with Python and R. And any questions so far, anyone? Like there are some projects that I have been working on, like there was something with automation. I can't show you the actual project, but I'll just give an example. Like basically the client wanted some screen testing. So they wanted the mouse to move automatically. So if you notice here, if I, let me just show you one example. PyAuto GUI, just give me a moment. By the way, this is how you install a library, okay? Pip install, and you give the library name. Let me see if there's anything else I require. Yeah. Okay, let's see if it works now. Okay, I think keyboard also I'll have to install. Like you see, these are very, very small packages. It's just 868 KB, right? And I'm not sure if time is already there, but you know what? Just to be safe, let me install time as well. Yeah, I think time we don't need. Okay, let's see if it works now. So I click on run and Give me a moment. Okay, do you see this, everybody? 1920 and 1080. You know what this is? This is the resolution of my laptop, my screen. So what are we doing? We're importing this library. Then we're saying pi_auto_GUI.size, and then I'm looking at the height and the width. Now, why is this important? Because when you're rolling out a program or a solution for different clients will have different systems, right? Somebody might have a high resolution, somebody might have a 4K display, somebody might have an old laptop with a 1280 720 display. Now, how do I find that manually? Of course, you will have to ask users, but you can do this automatically. If I show you some more examples, look at this. Watch this carefully. When I click on run, you know what this is? It is basically telling me 511707. So it is telling me what is the position of my mouse on my screen. So if you notice carefully, if I keep my mouse here, watch, look at the result. It will tell me 1742401. Okay, let me do it once again. If I keep it at the bottom right of my screen, it will tell me 18611008, right? So this is very helpful because it can help you track where the user has kept the mouse on the screen, right? Similarly, you can do other things as well. For example, if you notice, just give me a moment. Let me give you a simple example. Okay, look at this one. 3 lines. When I click on run, look what will happen. Did you see my mouse actually moved? Watch carefully. This is my mouse. When I press Control Enter, my mouse actually moved down. This 50, if I change to, let's say, 150, what's going to happen is when I click on run, just what? It will move 150 pixels down. Same thing. If I say -50 and I click on run, it will go 50 pixels to the left and 150 pixels down. This is very, very handy because what happens is when we're doing what we call UAT, you know, some of you will end up working like product managers, and there is something called UAT, which is user acceptance testing. After we create a form or a survey or a spreadsheet model, whatever it is, a dashboard, it is very important to understand how do users interact with it. You know, how do they click on it? In what order do they click on it? Do they have any problem with the user interface and the user design? And how do you test all of that? Obviously, if you want to test all of that, you need to do something called screen automation, right? Which will automatically test this for you. Now, in the last few years, the world has changed a lot. Now, screen automation is not usually done by Python and R because you already have RPA tools available, right? So robotic process and automation, one of the most basic things and the most common things that RPA does is to basically remove the work of people and to do it using a machine, right? So for example, if I have to again and again test different ideas and go to different websites, why do I need to hire a person who will do it? I can simply hire a RPA tool for this or hire a company that will give me an RPA tool. There are 3 big companies in this space. You have Automation Anywhere, right? Then you have Blue Prism, and then you have UiPath, right? There are lots of others as well. For example, Microsoft has its own platform called Power Automate, which is owned by Microsoft now. Same thing, it's an automation tool, allows you to basically automate your task. I'll just give you a simple example.
We live in a world that
Okay, this one doesn't have anything in it. Just hold on. Do you see this? What is happening when a person will create a record in a database? This is a database icon. If you just zoom in, what is going to happen is it will automatically run a UI flow, which is an automation. That means the account name and the level will be created. If the account already exists, then an email notification will be sent with this subject line and this particular body. If no, then a message will be posted like this. This is the basic idea of how automation works, right? So it's called business process automation, where earlier we were doing business process outsourcing. That means that a TCS and a Infosys will basically have people who will do this for clients, but now you're able to have technology that can do this rule-based repetitive task. Basically, wherever there is a repetitive task, you can do it using automation, right? Then you have companies like Zapier, which we also use sometimes. Zapier basically can integrate multiple platforms with each other. So they call something called Zaps. And just a minute. Okay. So if you notice, you can create what you call workflows. So a workflow basically means that whenever an action will happen, a resultant action will happen concurrently, right? So for example, if you're looking at Microsoft Flow, there's something on the website which I'm not able to find. Let me show you the templates. Yeah, excellent. This is what I wanted to show you. Do you see this, everyone? What's happening here is that it is saying that, let's say, okay, send form responses for approval. So when a respondent will fill up the form, automatically that data will go to SharePoint. It will come to Excel, and using Outlook, a mail will be sent for approval to confirm whether the response was correct or not. If an email is coming via Outlook, what will happen? The attachment will automatically via Excel, MS Office, will get saved to your SharePoint document library, right? Like this. So when an email with an attachment arrives in the inbox folder, it will automatically save the attachment file in the SharePoint document library, like this. So I hope all of you have an idea of how automations work. This is not an area that I work on a lot, but every once in a while, you know, we want to do something at a system level. See, when I use Python or when I use VBA, I'm only doing automation at an application level. I'm automating Power BI or I'm automating Excel. But what we're able to do here is we're able to basically do automation at a system level. So I can have different systems that interact with each other. In Microsoft, you can only interact with different Microsoft applications. But when you work on a company like Zapier, Zapier will help you automate with different types of automations. For example, Google Sheets, which means that when a user will enter a value in Google Sheet, it will automatically get appended to my Excel file as well, like this, right? Like this. So it's amazing, right? Like, again, I'm not covering this in detail, but definitely something you guys should have a look at. Because see, going forward, organizations are going to start moving towards automation because you have these very reasonably priced tools available. Like earlier, you would need to hire an IT team and consultants and all of that. But now you can basically get these, and Zapier is like super cheap because they only charge you depending on the number of zaps or the number of events that are occurring, right? So if you look at the pricing, just look at this. 100 tasks a month is free, which is amazing, right? If you have 750 tasks a month, it will only cost you a certain amount of money, 2,870, right? Of course, this is per month, but that's nothing for a client, right? Like, I mean, imagine you're spending about 35,000 a year, whatever, 40,000 a year, that's really nothing, right? And if you have a larger requirement, so let's say you have a very large number of tasks, you have 20 lakh tasks, that is where you can look at an enterprise plan like this. Good. Right. Any questions, anyone? Remember, Excel can also be automated with Python. You have a library called OpenPyXL, which will basically allow you to integrate Python with Excel files. It's a slightly outdated library, but it's okay. I mean, it has most of the things that you would require. Any questions, anyone? So I hope by now all of you get a sense of what I do as an analytics consultant. on a daily basis, right? So remember, most of my work is on Excel and Power BI, about 70-80% of it, and the rest of it happens on all these platforms and technologies. Anybody, anything that you would like to ask? I think today we discussed other things as well. I showed you how clients are handled by a project. What is the sort of conversation that happens with the client, and then what is the expected amount of time that we take, and what is the billing that happens. So most of the consulting firms as well have a billing as per finance students should. Let me answer this question first. Finance students should focus on which software? Oh, this is an easy one. You have to focus on Excel, Power BI, VBA. I mean, this one is a no-brainer. Uh, Finance guys, unless you are working in trading, algorithmic trading, learning Python and all really has no significance for you. Like if you're working in financial planning, if you're working in, let's say, mergers and acquisition, learning Python and all, I mean, has no relevance because you're not working with the sort of data where you have to scrape data or use machine learning and all. It is only mostly with trading, foreign exchange, where you need to learn all this. If you're working in any other finance profiles, maybe in core banking, investment banking, Excel, Power BI, and VBA is where 95% of your work will happen. Like, I'm not saying don't learn Python. Learning Python is something all of you have to do because some basic level of knowledge should be there so that you're not left behind going forward. Whether you need to gain an expertise in it, not really. I wouldn't suggest that. Like literally, I mean, Excel and Power BI is going to be your bread and butter if you're working in finance. Let me also show you the sort of models that are created in finance. Because especially the first years will not even have done your internships, no? So I'll just give you an idea. I'm sorry, I'll have to stop the recording here because I'm not recording. So I'm not going to cover R today. We can start 30 minutes early tomorrow as well. That's okay. I don't mind spending more time with you guys. So I'll cover R for a bit. R is very similar to Python, though. I'll help you understand how to set it up and how is R different from Python. And then we'll focus on some financial modeling. So I'll tell you how complicated Excel formulas are written. And then in the last 30 minutes, I'll show you how PowerPoint presentations are created. Like how do you create these professional PowerPoint presentations? Like this is a project I did for a client. This was for, anyway, the details are not important, but this was for a competition that IBM was organizing in California. So this is the presentation that we created. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Draft 6. Right? Like there aren't, how should I share it with you? Just a moment. Anyway, I don't know how you can see it, but there aren't animations and all, but I just wanted to show you how, sort of the entire layout, icons, maps have been created. How you use colors, how you use charts, like this. It's no rocket science, right? So when you look at it, it's not that it's something you can't do, but in PowerPoint, it's just the small tips and tricks that I'll give to you, how to make more professional presentations. Right. Yeah, so that would be all from my side. If you have any questions, you can ask.
So I think we can wind up for today, as nobody has any question.
All right, great. As always, I'll share the recording with you. So even though today I think other than Power Query, there really is not much else for you to practice. Suggest any course for VBA. Piyush, I put some videos on VBA on my YouTube channel, and I also have a beginner's course on VBA. I'll share all these details tomorrow if that's okay, because I'm sure that tomorrow when we wrap up, a lot of you will have different questions. So I'll just put every answer on an email and send it across to you. So rather than answering it one by one, just remember your question, ask me tomorrow, and I'll give you the answer. Excellent. So thank you, everyone. That will be all from my side. And we will start at 12 o'clock tomorrow as well.